Today we're testing the EMP Shield. I haven't seen anybody on YouTube test this thing out yet, so I figured I'd go mad scientist on this thing just to see what it would handle without breaking.
And we're back, and we have got a star-studded panel today to discuss EMPs and how to protect yourself from EMPs and some amazing footage along those lines. First and foremost, Steve Yost, Anything Outdoors with Steve, Master Electrician. We also have Mike Bellamere, Master Electrician and CEO of Switch It Up Inc., and our in-house Mad Bomber, Mike Sterling. And the reason that he's here today, he is not an electrician, neither am I, but Mike Sterling, being a bomb expert, is here to tell us what nuclear warheads can produce what level of an EMP and what the threshold is that we need to protect against as a bare minimum. Do you want to add anything to that, Mike?
I would like to add something in here. I'd like to ask everybody that's watching, please hang in there with us on this. There's not going to be any one set of answers. We've got information that is spread out through this. This is a very complex issue. There is a mountain of data that's available on this. Unfortunately, a lot of it is deeply scientific. We dug through a bunch of this stuff. We're trying to distill a bunch of this down for everybody.
Yeah, I think I would add to that we have scoured the internet looking for video of somebody proving the efficacy of EMP Shield's products, even their own website, which I'm going to bring up in a minute. And we were unable to find anything other than a building that was hit by lightning and it blew the EMP shield off the wall and everything inside was okay, but it was a one and done situation. Whereas, as we're going to show you, the EMP shield can actually take multiple strikes and survive. So I'm just going to bring up their webpage quickly and we'll have a quick look at their devices. So this is EMP Shield's website. This is their homepage. No offense to EMP Shield, but you can kind of tell these are techie guys more so than marketing guys. And if you look through their products, you'll see this device right here, which is to protect your home from EMP strikes, lightning strikes, coronal mass ejections, all of those things. It's on special right now for $389. This is the unit that we cover in this video. As Mike mentioned, if you're interested in all of the fine details on the testing page for EMP Shield, you can download test results, which I'll come to in a second, and they specify the DoD measurement specifications that their product exceeded. When you go into download test results, you get this PDF. Memory serves me right, it's 129 pages long. It's quite a read for somebody who is not well versed in this world. Steve, tell me, what was your position before we did any of this testing?
The main motivation is you're fully relying all information on their website. So they don't have anything that shows any outside testing. So I couldn't really put all my faith into that, because anybody can say anything about themselves. So, I am a paraglider, skydiver, firefighter, and there's no way to prove it other than what I just said. What I wanted to do was just test it to its fullest ability, to my capabilities, what I could test at least. Since EMP strikes are mostly a static type energy discharge, you can build up amps onto the power lines over a great distance. And that's what will actually take out your stuff as well. So the high amperage, high voltage, but mostly what I was focused on was that high voltage spike that it can handle.
Let's jump into the first segment of your testing, and we'll be stopping the video as we progress through it so everybody can comment on it.
I was recently reminded that I am on the internet, and since you cannot believe anything you see on the internet, I have to provide proof of everything I'm doing here. So I'm going to show you the voltages that we're running. Since I can't meter out the high voltage 400,000 volts, I'm going to utilize the dielectric breakdown of air plus or minus 10%. So we're at least 350,000 volts up to 400,000 volts. And the reason for 8¼ inch is because realistically, the dielectric breakdown of the air is somewhere in the 19,000 range, because humidity and dust, everything plays a part in how it jumps that air gap.
Give us that section in layman's terms.
Well, like anything on the internet, skepticism is warranted. So you really do. And you're the one that mentioned it. I kind of tend to forget, but you're the one that had mentioned that you really do have to prove everything. Otherwise, you get about 10,000 comments saying, oh, no, you're on EMP Shield's sales team. And so, of course, you're going to say it's going to work well. So that's essentially what I'm trying my best to prove what I'm doing to this thing. And it's tough to do. I mean, I've got a high volt meter lead that can test up to 25,000 volts. But beyond that, I popped one of my meters attempting to test higher than that. And so it did blow up the meter.
Mike B, you went on the hunt for something that would measure hundreds of thousands of volts. And what did you find out?
The biggest one I found was a 500,000, but the unit was like $4,000.
Wow.
Yes.
Okay, so serious equipment. Let's go back to our video and watch the next section.
Now, keep in mind too, I am also a naysayer of this. I don't believe that it'll do what it says. I'm going to do my best to try and destroy this thing with some high voltage. I am not backed by EMP Shield, not affiliated with them in any way, and I'm not getting paid for this type of testing. I set up a Marx generator, and that's what I'm getting the 400,000 volts from. And if you are curious about Marx generators, you can look them up online, but I don't suggest that you build your own because they can kill you. So keep that in mind. Any testing that you see here, don't try to reproduce this at home. It is very deadly and dangerous if you are not used to working with high voltages. It will jump out and get you, and keep in mind I'm jumping an air gap of 8 inches, so it can jump to you at a greater distance potentially.
Steve, before we carry on, explain a Marx generator. We're going to include a link down below in the description. I'll pull that page up right now while you're explaining it.
Yes, the fundamentals of a Marx generator is you're putting in a series of capacitors, and they've got an air gap. So you charge these capacitors. I've got a 20,000 volt power supply charging the capacitors, and as soon as it jumps the first spark gap, it causes a chain reaction to dump all the capacitors. So it's essentially an electrostatic discharge, which is very similar to an EMP, and they use Marx generators to test EMP equipment. So I figured this was pretty much the best way to test it on the electrostatic discharge side of things. So again, not the high amperage, but you could make them as large as you want. I just did a 20-stage Marx generator. Each capacitor is charged to 20,000 volts, and on discharge, it's capable of 400,000 volts. And it can be just a little slightly higher. It just depends on how you've got that air gap adjusted. So you can adjust, fine-tune the voltage a little bit, but it gets really difficult to really fine-tune that down to a certain bandwidth.
Just for argument's sake, if somebody was standing in close proximity to a Marx generator, can it jump to them? Would it try to ground through them, potentially kill them?
If you are grounded to the same type of source that it's grounded to, then yes. And so if you've got it plugged into your wall, you are grounded. If you're touching the floor, anything metal, it can jump to you really easily.
So again, for legal purposes, do not try and do this at home. We are not counseling you to do this at home. And I'll also add that we have no affiliation ourselves at Survival Dispatch with EMP Shield. We weren't paid to do this video. We don't get any affiliate commissions from them. It's just that when we run surveys, which is frequently, whether it be by email or here on YouTube, the number one interest is, what do I do when the grid goes down? What do I do if an EMP hits? It's always number one. So that was the purpose of doing this video. So let's jump into the next section.
So just to show that the high test lead, how it functions, this is the high test probe at 120 volts, which is currently what I'm running. It shows 0.122 for 122 volts. It's a 1,000 to 1 ratio. If it shows 1 volt, then it's 1,000 volts. So we're 0.122 volts AC at 120 volts. I have several components, electronics hooked up to this. So you'll see as the different voltages spike what we get. This is the EMP Shield showing that we're only hooking up to one line. So we're not doing the split phase function. We're just doing 120 volt instead of 240.
It looked to me like you had the EMP Shield at the end of the run. Is that correct?
It's typically installed in your panel. I was referencing the panel at being the very end. I'm electrifying the far end, so equivalent to what your house would see if an EMP pulse hit your house and it's connected to the panel. And of course, I don't have the distance of run, but that makes things better for it in the long run anyway.
Essentially, in your test bed, if that pulse was coming from outside your house, the opposite side of where your panel is, it would hit your wiring inside of your home, electronics inside of your home before it even gets to the panel, correct?
Correct.
Okay, good to know. Let's jump into the next piece.
This thing claims that it can protect your whole house just by being connected to your panel. So we're testing that too. So it's at the end of the line on these tests. So not hitting the panel first, which would be hitting it first, shunting to ground. We're hitting at the end of the line, which would be your house side. And we're hitting all these voltages on the house side. So it's going to be hitting the electronics on essentially your thermostat and HVAC system first, LED lights, GFCI. We've got some power pack in there, and that's essentially what we're doing. I will prove the first voltages that we're hitting with, which is 20,000 volts. The lab is operating, and we will take off the power side. I've got a separate ground rod for this outside. I'm not having it ground or shunt to ground in any part of my house. And I suspect that they're using MOVs, which are metal oxide varistors, to shunt to ground. And how those operate is you've got a disc with a dielectric breakdown in it. When it hits a certain voltage, it goes from infinite resistance to zero resistance, which would shunt directly to ground or whatever the other probe is hooked to, which in this case is more than likely ground. I have a feeling that if you had a floating ground, this thing would not operate properly and potentially kill electronics. So keep that in mind too. You have to have your ground connected. So I've got to test each side of this coil to ground. So we'll get half the voltage on this side and half the voltage on that side. And this is our ground probe. All right, power on. Lights go ahead and flicker every time. So we've got 10,500 volts on that one. All right, so we've got the other side hooked up, and we'll go ahead and turn on the power. And we have 9,790 on this side. So it's a little bit lower. And just so you can see, I'm hooking up both neutral and hot to each probe, so we're getting the combined voltage of the entire coil. Supposed to be 30,000 volts per centimeter. We've got 8 1/4 inches here.
What did we just see, Steve?
Okay, so that was just the air gap jump, just to prove that we're in that between 350 to 400,000 volt range. So if you've got a dielectric breakdown of air at 30,000 volts, then really you only need 12 centimeters. The dielectric breakdown of air is 30,000 volts per centimeter. So if you've got 12 centimeters, then that shows 360,000 volts. And so you're well within that range, but we extended that because realistically, the dielectric breakdown is affected by humidity, dust, and all kinds of factors. So I opened that gap up even further. So I didn't show just the 12 or 14 centimeters, I showed further.
Let's jump into the next section.
Oh, you heard that. Zap again, zap, zap, zap. We should be fully discharged at this point. I'm going to go ahead and hook her up to the lab.
Okay, what were you doing there, Steve?
So that's for my own safety. I'm discharging all those capacitors. So after it jumps that air gap, they're still charged. And so they'll still hold 20 or 30,000 volts in that entire system, and that can still jump to you. And even up maybe around 100,000 volts or more. So if you touch either part of those leads when you're connecting to anything, yeah, you get it real good. And at further point of the video there towards the end, I included one where I'm not even touching the Marx generator, but the supply source, and just touching it and ground was enough to zap me.
It's at the very, very end of the footage.
Yes.
Hey, Steve, were you using a glow rod as an insulator? Was that a fiberglass glow rod?
No, that's a fiberglass stick with a copper wire attached to it, so I could just touch both the leads.
I noticed that section of video. I've got my volume turned up pretty high. I could hear the zaps as you were discharging it.
Yeah, it's quite loud in person. It's pretty impressive. And of course, immediately you smell the air ozone starting to increase in the room, and within 2 or 3 zaps, the whole room feels like it's filled with ozone.
All right, let's jump into the next section here.
Instead of having a dynamic charge go to this, I'm going to have a full static charge hit. Okay, there's 15 hits. Instead of doing a dynamic charge where it was just connected directly, I'm having the full static hit the conductor as if it were static charge hitting the house. So hopefully that proves it to everybody that I hit this with the voltage I've been claiming. If you don't believe it, I don't know what else I can do to show it. I've got no reason to make this up. Take it if you want. If you don't, I don't know if anything survived yet, so let's find out. Now this could be related or it's unrelated, I'm not sure, but the refrigerator and freezer I've got upstairs, the battery backup system on that started freaking out. It went to battery mode and drained the battery, so I'm not sure what happened there. I'm hoping it's unrelated, but I don't know. I am not connected to the house ground in any way or form, so this should not be connected to my house system other than what I'm doing right now. And maybe that GFCI tripping here is enough to cause the issues up there, I'm not sure. All right. So I think that's something. So our EMP shield still shows it is working. We still have both LEDs. We still have a furnace. I would say without question, this thing actually does do what it's claiming and more. We just hit this thing on the house side, so not even the panel side. So we hit this thing on the house side with at least 360,000 volts, and it is doing just fine. Nothing is failed. We have everything working just as it was before. I would say that is definitive that this thing works. I would say if you have any doubts, I would say try it yourself, but don't try this at home. By all means, do not try this at home. This is a 20-stage Marx generator. Each capacitor is good for 20,000 volts. And so you've got a potential of 400,000 volts with a 20,000 volt power supply. And so that's what we are running to this thing, is 20,000 volts power supply to 20 capacitors. And the way the Marx generator works is when one capacitor discharges, jumping its gap, it causes a cascade for everything to dump all at once. And so that's how you're able to get such large voltages. Again, this is a low amperage device, so it's a high voltage, low amperage. So we are not hitting this with the maximum amperage. Lightning strikes, you'll have an excess of 4, 5, 6,000 amps, but the voltage could be anywhere from 50,000 hitting the ground up to 1,000,000 if it was a direct strike onto your conductors. There is a story online of one of these having a direct lightning strike to the grid on a pump station. So this is a city pump station. It completely melted down the EMP shield, but everything that it was connected to, so that panel and everything downstream was just fine. All the pumps survived. And something like that would typically melt down those windings. I can tell you after taking 360,000 volts that I'm really impressed with this EMP shield. Everything seemed to hold up just fine. It didn't blow up, it didn't melt down. I'm giving that a thumbs up right there. We didn't lose any equipment, so that's kind of cool too. I would say this was a successful run. All right, that is a destroyed LCD screen. Got me.
All right, Steve. So
that was the long clip.
Dude, that is a lot of volts, man.
You got lit up there for a second, Steve.
Yes, I did. Yes, admittedly,
Stefan,
even when you follow safety practices, static discharge couples onto all kinds of things, including my power source. So I got hit by the power source. As soon as I touched that, I got zapped off of that because it generates the electricity throughout the air too, and it'll couple onto other things.
We saw the outtakes at the end, but step us through the test, and then we'll get both mics to weigh in.
And I did a static discharge, and the video footage that I just saw on here was low resolution, so I couldn't tell if it was actually showing the lightning bolts, but it is actually hitting that conductor. And at that point, I started experiencing a lot of failures of like camera equipment. I lost a lot of footage on my SD card, including when I was doing my fail test too. The EMP Shield was disconnected from the system completely, and I had the camera up a little closer, and so I'm hitting that stuff, and it took out a lot of the footage that I hit with. And so I don't have any footage of the stuff getting hit other than what you just saw there. That was the only little bit of surviving footage. I showed that, okay, this is fried, this is broke, and to do it after the fact, after the footage was done, then it's kind of pointless. So I didn't re-record anything because it was a pointless moot point there. I also had issues upstairs with my refrigerator and freezer, and they're connected on a UPS system. And for some reason, that UPS system went into fault, even though this isn't connected to the house at all, other than supply voltage side. And it took out the UPS, saying that it was a full discharge, and went into power fault, saying that it had an overpower circumstance where it couldn't supply the power to both the fridge and freezer, which was the first time that's ever happened too. So I'm not sure if that's just happenstance or if it had something related to having all this voltage being downstairs, because like I said, it coupled onto the camera, it coupled onto other surrounding sources. So all my electrical wiring in the wall, it could have coupled onto that too, causing a power spike upstairs.
Mike, I think you'd probably speak to this better, but do you think that a lot of that would come from atmospheric bleed into the main house wiring, which, I mean, we're talking about boatload of voltage going on here. I mean, that was a lot, but I that's the only thing that I could think that would be atmospheric bleed, just because you're pushing so much energy into the air. What do you think, Mike?
I would have to agree. Those UPS systems are sensitive to that. At that point, Steve, you were hitting it with 360,000 volts, right?
Yeah, roughly. And like I say, I was giving it a plus or minus from the 400,000. So I just erred on the side of the low end. It's up in that 400,000 range. I'll just say 360 just to be safe.
So what ended up happening with the unit? Did you reset it and then it took a charge and then it was working good again? Was there the reset button on the side you had to hit or something?
The EMP Shield itself, is that what you're asking?
No, your UPS system upstairs for the fridge and the freezer.
UPS system, I had to fully disconnect it, let it charge separately, and then reconnect it to the system again. And it reset.
But it did recover.
It did recover.
Okay, so you didn't kill anything outside of your test arena. You didn't kill anything outside of their actual dead.
Yeah, I've got a panel protector, and out of my meter base, I've got another protecting device too. It's got all kinds of surge protection devices in my entire electrical system between my house, shop, and meter.
So that probably saved you.
It could have.
You might want to check with your neighbors. Don't actually, you know what? Don't talk to your neighbors or the power company.
Yeah, no.
Yeah, I'm surprised you're not doing your accent. I know nothing.
I know nothing.
Where's the monocle?
Yeah.
This is an ongoing joke, Mike B.
I know nothing, see nothing, hear nothing.
Mad Bomber Mike is a really big fan of Klaus Schwab and the WWF, just so you know.
Yes.
He's fond of telling the rest of us that we're going to eat Z-bugs.
Eat the bugs.
I got to tell you, Steve, that was impressive, man. You literally risking getting electrocuted to test this product.
I was trying to be as safe as possible.
Watching that electricity jump the gap, that's
a long jump.
Oh yeah, that's what everyone needs to see. When you see that power jump the gap, I mean, there's no denying you're putting some serious volts through that thing.
Well, also the fact that you didn't just do a single snap across.
Yes.
You extended it over a period of time, like an E1, E2, and E3 pulse system, like you would have. I mean, granted, you went way past the time frame. We're, for an E1 to E3 process, we're talking 1.3, 1.4 seconds.
Explain E1s, E2s, and E3s, Mike.
Okay, so the E1, E2, and E3, those are the different portions of a pulse for an EMP device or for an EMP effect. The E1 is not nearly as strong, but it usually has a tendency to begin the overwhelming process. It's extremely short. It's very sharp. It's basically, it's a big
High voltage.
Yeah, it's high voltage, but very short duration. The E2 lasts quite a bit longer. It's not quite as high in the voltage, but because a lot of things are already overwhelmed by the E1, it lasts longer. So it'll get into there and then it'll really start chewing things up. And then the E3 winds up coming in actually compared, radiation timescale wise, very late in the whole process. It's not very powerful and it's not very profound, but it lasts quite a long time power wise. It basically plays pickup man on the process.
That E3 is the one that'll start building amperage on, and just because it's such a long duration, that builds the amperage. That's what's taking out your transformers for your power grid.
Right. And it's usually the one that would be responsible for working the power grid itself.
Yes.
Just because of long-term effects on there.
Yes.
You get these real long power lines. The longer a line is, the more susceptible it is to these effects. So long power lines, very susceptible. Short wires inside of your laptop, things like that, less susceptible.
Mike B, weigh in on this as far as EMP strikes versus CMEs, what a CME is, and how this product protects from that as well.
So CME is coronal mass ejection. That's caused when you get a sunspot and you get a massive solar flare that rips away from the sun, creating a coronal mass ejection. And when that CME hits the atmosphere, it supercharges the atmosphere with up to a million volts if you get into a G5 solar storm. A G5 solar storm that's more than a Carrington level event, but a G5 would knock out communications, the internet, and every transformer in the world, essentially.
Good chance it might turn us into a cinder as well.
Yeah, I don't talk about that one too often, but yeah, it can superheat the atmosphere. During the Carrington level event, they had reports where people felt like their skin was burning and they were literally jumping into ponds and lakes to cool off.
I know what the Carrington event was, but for the benefit of those in our audience who don't, could you explain that, Mike?
It happened September 1st and 2nd, 1859. It was the largest recorded CME that we have written. And that time, that's when they had the telegraph lines. And the event was so extreme that it melted the telegraph lines off the poles, and the telegraphs that were actually in the offices literally burnt up.
Are we currently in the peak of the solar cycle? Is 11 years, if memory serves me right?
Scientists say 2025 is going to be the peak of the solar maximum.
Okay.
And scientists are predicting that in 2025, we could potentially see a G4 or a G5 solar storm, which in that event would take out communications, at a bare minimum, would knock internet out for a few months.
So just to put my tinfoil hat on here for a second, we know that 2024 is just going to be a shit show. There are people out there, conspiracy theorists, who say that there's a likelihood of a false flag EMP attack to be launched to scare the bejesus out of people and shut down our electrical grid. And then next year, potentially CMEs on a larger scale than we've seen. Isn't there a typical cycle to this Carrington level stuff? Like every 100 years or so, something big has happened in the past?
So the sun operates on what they call an 11-year cycle, but it's upward ticking to that solar maximum of the 11-year cycle. And then the activity of the sun is supposed to come down. So they're saying 2025 is going to be the peak of the solar maximum that we've already been watching since the Carrington level event, going up ticking. So what they're predicting is, with the activity they're seeing on the sun right now, that the CME activity is only going to increase. Those X flares are going to increase. We had the largest since the Carrington level event on December 31st of 2003. It was an X5 New Year's Eve. It actually wreaked havoc on communications all over the planet.
Yeah, I thought I saw some stuff in December that there were not that high a level, but that there were some spikes that caused disruption for cell phones, internet routers, that sort of stuff.
All year last year, there was radio disruptions that media is obviously not covering as much as they should, but it's going to be interesting. 2024, 2025 is going to be interesting. But to touch on your point with the false flag level event, with what we've seen in 2020 with that whole circus sideshow, I don't see any stops being held back. I see full tilt ahead to do whatever they need to do to to disrupt everything here in the U.S.
So, question for Mad Bomber Mike: the Chinese balloon, that was allowed to fly over our country, spying on our military. Could an EMP device be carried by a balloon? Number one, and number two, how could an EMP be man-made without using a nuclear weapon? Is that possible, or do they have to use a nuke to hit us with this
Yes.
stuff?
So it could carry a non-nuclear EMP device, but their magnitude is significantly smaller. They're just they're a very localized effect. You might be able to hit an area like the size of a small town with one maximum. Most of the time, you're looking at something like the size of like a college football stadium or a pro football stadium size. You're not going to hit anything really, really big. There was a system that they were screwing about with that they could basically mount to like a cruise missile. And the theory was that it would fly along and it would flash this EMP device, recharge, flash, recharge, flash, recharge, flash. And I think that they were talking about using that as like affecting, specifically building itself so that it would fly from power station to power station to power station and smack a power station, smack a power station, smack a power station, stuff like that. But it was just so much cheaper for the military to say, yeah, let's just go on ahead and drop carbon fiber filament all over those things. It shuts the whole station down, and then we can come back in a couple of weeks later after we seize it, pull all the carbon fiber filament off of it, turn everything right back on again, and it works again.
Go all the way to the extreme for the Armageddon folks. What would it take to blanket our country in EMPs at such a level that it took out the grid, took out electronics,
Right.
caused mass devastation?
Okay, for reference here. So I worked with a lot of nuclear weapons in my time. It was mandatory reading on a whole lot of this stuff in nuclear weapons school on this stuff. So back in 1962 was when we did the first and last atmospheric live weapon testing. That was the US Starfish Prime and the Soviet 184 tests. That was in 1962. And when you have Russians or Soviets and Americans all saying, yeah, let's not do that again, that's probably a bad idea. These are the people that still popped the Novaya Zemlya bomb that was 55 megatons at that time. So what we're looking at is you've only got a total of 3 countries that meet the parameters that can actually perform a high altitude EMP strike. All right. You got the US, you got Russia, you got China. North Korea, no way. They haven't got it. The Indians, the Pakis, the French, the British, even the Israelis, nobody's got the capability to perform an actual high altitude EMP, much less an enhanced EMP. All right. So we've got to break that down. 3 countries only. First, you have to have a weapon that meets the appropriate yield, 1.18 megatons minimum, bare minimum. For an enhanced EMP, it all being theoretical, the thought is 3 to 5 megatons, okay, or more. You got to get it to an altitude of 300 to 500,000 kilometers over the surface of the planet and over your target at the same time. Also with, things like, missiles shooting at it. All right. And you've got to have a big enough missile to get a 400 kiloton plus weight to that altitude and that point in space. That is no small thing. Okay. 400 kilos is a big payload. That is heavy. The Russians have got the SS-18 M6 systems. That is a 10 to 20 megaton warhead. It's a leftover from the Cold War. They've got about 10 of them. That's it. Good thing is SS-18 is a comparatively slow missile. All right. The Chinese have got the DF-SC. I don't know a lot about them. Their information is very, very thin on the open source side. It can hold about a 3 megaton warhead, give or take, and it can get to the appropriate place in space, right? We're not going to do it to ourselves, but both the Chinese and the Russians have been screwing around, of course, just like we have with the nuclear weapons in space kind of thing. Okay, you can do it, but we've just talked about that kind of crap. So again, enhanced EMP Enhanced EMP is what you're going to want. So if you're going to go with a regular EMP device, you're going to need probably 8 of them over the continental United States to do what you really want to do. If you're going to do enhanced EMP, you're probably only going to need 3 or 4 of them. But of course, that's theoretical. Enhanced EMP is 100% theoretical. So you're looking at a pure fission device because you want more gamma radiation, and the casing has a tendency to absorb more of the gamma radiation the more casing that you have. So you've got to cut that casing down to the bare minimums. So it's going to be pure fission and multi-megaton. That is not an easy thing to do. That is a very tough nut to crack, and it's very dangerous just for the people that are making it. And you're looking at approximately 200,000 voltmeters or volts per meter of output on atmosphere. All right, that is a lot of juice, but that's the biggest thing theoretically man-made that we know about, that was not even looked at by the 2005 EMP Commission, which I will tell everybody right now, take that 2005 EMP Commission, throw it out. It was written almost exclusively on conjecture. They took all the possible effects that could happen, and they went all the way to the right on every possible effect. All of the assumptions in there, they went worst case scenario on absolutely everything. Starting in 2007, both the DoD and the DOE began large quantities of actual testing. The problem is nobody's willing to pop a nuke in space again just for, hey, let's see what it'll do. Because we've all figured out, hey, that's probably a bad idea, right? And until we decide to do that, like over the moon or something like that, use, our own moon as a test point, which, gee, what could possibly go wrong with that? So there's all this research being done. It's very heavily classified. It was still heavily classified when I was still on active duty and had clearances, and I couldn't get access to any of this stuff, even though, we kind of needed it. But one thing that I do know is it's all very small scale, and it's based almost exclusively on the vulnerability of individual targets. They're sticking with what we theoretically know about what the weapon or about what the actual EMP effect is going to be. The problem is, we talked about this before we got started. I was going to try and do some of the math, and then I ran into the roadblocks from before. There's like 9 or 11 different theories of what the math is supposed to be. Even the mathematicians can't agree on what math we're supposed to use on this. And here I am. I'm just a bomb tech, man. I threw up my hands and just said, okay, man, I'm just gonna go with what I can find, because it's not easy. It's not simple, and it's very rough. But you have to remember, and all these things they show, they'll have like a great big dish laid out across the United States, and it says that everything here is gonna go. No, if you look for a scenario that everybody here is going to know, the book series 1 Second After, all right? In that situation, they had, 3 or 4 devices popped over the U.S., something like that? But they were saying that, 3. So they're saying that it blanketed the entire continental United States, shut everything in the United States down. Well, that's just untrue. What you're going to wind up with, you're going to have total burnout zones that are going to be like half the size of the state of Georgia. And then you're going to have diminishing effect radiating outward from that. And you get areas out on the far outside of that, they may not even know that anything happened. You may have people right there in the burnout zone dying of radiation poisoning from the massive quantities of gamma radiation punching their way straight through the atmosphere.
Yeah, so pulling all this together, essentially the chances that we would have the entire country blanketed in EMPs is pretty low because of what would be required to do this from such a high altitude. Probably more likely would be the Russians have somewhere just north of 5,000 nukes. They'd have to launch a tremendous number of them towards us and do like a carpet bombing deal to cover the entire country. And in that case, it's Armageddon and nobody gives a shit about their electronics, right?
Right, exactly. I mean, we're pointed diminishing returns and mutual assured destruction. May as well crack open that really expensive scotch, kids.
Right. So Mike B, when the Carrington level event hit, and I know you have a lot of knowledge on CMEs, it's not as unlikely that a CME could cover the entire country, correct?
CME would cover the entire globe because when it hits the atmosphere, it just comes in and circles everything. So large enough CME, the whole planet is in a world of hurt.
So the Carrington level event was not just in America. It was the entire planet got hit with this shit.
Yeah, it was global. I don't have the notes in front of me, but it affected the United States, Europe. It was telegraph lines scattered all over the planet.
Considering the fact that you're CEO of a national level electrical company, what's your recommendation for people to protect themselves from EMPs, which might be regional, less likely to be national, but CMEs that could very well be global? What are your recommendations for homeowners and business owners?
Well, I like to lead with, especially on your channel, with all of the survivalist and prepper community. We all spend a lot of money on all of our gear and the battery backups and our solar panels and our generators. We put a lot of money into being ready just in case the grid goes down or shit hits the fan. I know myself upwards of $10,000 in backup stuff to be ready for a small price when you think about it. To go and buy an EMP shield and get someone to put in your panel, you're looking at maybe $800 to $1,500 to protect over $10,000 in equipment. The EMP shield is a very simple, quick fix to protect all of your investment for being ready.
Shameless plug. Your company has the ability to service customers across the country and can install EMP shield devices, the battery backups, the solar PV systems, all that stuff, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So I just want to get that out of the way. You did not pay us to say that. You didn't pay us to bring you on the show or anything like that. So back to Steve for a second here. Anytime that we touch on, say, e-bikes is a great example, invariably the pundits come out and say, EMP, EMP, and my response has typically been, well, you could get hit walking across the street. You're never going to walk across the street ever again. Like, why would you forego some really cool technology just because there's this, chance that it may happen? But then I got thinking, when you were doing your tests, if the e-bikes are plugged into your electrical system in your home and you get hit with an EMP or a CME, they would be protected.
Yeah, without question. And when I did my fail test, it actually did take out the transformer running that HVAC equipment. So I had a little HVAC controller hooked in, and it took out that transformer right off the bat, started smoking, and it stank bad. Yeah, so it will take out transformers without protection, and it was protected with that EMP shield. So I was kind of surprised by that. I was expecting the transformer to hold up the best. I was really taken back that was the first thing to let go.
I'll be honest, watching the video remotely, once you started doing the static discharge,
yeah,
that's pretty powerful footage that shows that the EMP stuff really does what it's supposed to do. I was surprised that it took so many hits because
I really wanted it to fail. So I just kept on zapping it. And I've got so much more that on footage that didn't survive on the camera. So I hit that thing hundreds of times.
It's kind of a shame that we, don't have the money to basically have an entire house side arena and just fill it with all the things that preppers would normally have and just do our own little arena test on that sort of stuff. If we had a great big sponsor with a lot of money that could do that for us, I'm sure we could come up with some kind of a way to do that.
So Mike B is friends with Kevin Harrington, the OG from Shark Tank. Maybe he could talk Kevin into building a small home for us that we could hit with a simulated EMP and see just exactly what happens on that scale.
I love that idea. So I would talk to the mad scientist Steve over there and see what we would need. I would love to be able to see if we could get a controlled event up to that 1,000,000 volts to give it that G5 solar storm, that the largest potential hit, and see what it does. I'd also like to put some batteries around, Steve, when you do that fail test. Just get like a lithium ion battery and then your old acid cell battery, and see what happens to an independent battery just sitting in the vicinity, see if it kills that charge. Then hook up one of the units for an RV or a car and see if that protects it. So there's all of these other products that I would love to see some testing on. But yeah, if we could do a whole house, put some laptops in there, plug in some e-bikes, give the whole deal. I mean, what better way to really test it on a live environment?
Electronic optics on firearms.
Time out. I thought you lost all your guns in a boating accident. The irony that all four of us would lose our entire gun collections in separate boating accidents is just astronomical. We should have bought lottery tickets.
That's
Yeah,
a good idea.
Except for
So-
Steve. Steve
Uh-uh.
lost all of his to electrical arcs.
I can't tell a lie. After last week, and we found out about these killer acorns here in Florida,
Oh, man.
I had to go
They'll
out and
get you.
buy a gun to protect myself.
So scared. So scared.
Very. Mike B brought up a couple points. This is the EMP Shield device from Energy. And
Okay.
as you can see, there's a plug, half a dozen receptacles. The idea is that you can use this in conjunction with anything essentially, but they sell them with their power stations like the Flex here. So this is a power station from Energy that I just mentioned. They partnered up with EMP Shield. This is the exact same device though that you tested, Steve. It's just they
Yeah.
made it handy for purposes of being portable. That's all.
It's just got a simple plug and play on the end,
Yes.
so you don't have to wire it in.
It's very simple. There's two devices that you can get through Energy. For those people who haven't watched our show before, we're pretty big fans of Energy. It's the closest thing that you can get to American-made power stations. So engineered here in the United States, support 100% here in the United States. The QA/QC that's done overseas, 100% done by American engineers. So yes, it's a shameless plug for Energy and EMP Shield, but we don't get any affiliate commissions from either of them. That's a pretty standard thing for us at Survival Dispatch on all partners. I don't want affiliate money coming in from vendors like this for the simple reason that I don't want to have a dog in the hunt. So when somebody says, "Oh, you're recommending this company because you're getting affiliate commissions," we don't get affiliate commissions. I can count on one hand the companies that give us any type of affiliate commissions. And it's not EMP Shield or Energy, just for the record. I'd like to, while we're on the energy topic, also mention that they've got a tactical unit that was designed for the DoD. They've got all kinds of them. And when you take that plus this type of device in a military context, they've deployed this in multiple bases and outposts now around the country and around the world because they're such high quality. EMP Shield, back to them for a quick second. And we've mentioned it already a couple times, but they make products that protect more than just your home. For example, here's the device that protects your car or your truck. This is the latest generation, pretty small. You can buy the last generation's a little bit bigger. I think this one's maybe $100 more than the old style one. They've got devices like this, which we just saw from Energy's website. So this goes between your MPPT supercharger, which is where you collect all your solar panels to one spot, and your inverter. So they're protected. We've got another unit here that's for 12-volt applications. So it could your boat, your RV, whatever the case may be. Yep, exactly. EMP Shield stuff is not just for protecting your home. It's anything that's out there. And I was thinking to myself, let's say that you had an e-bike as your get home vehicle and you have your car or truck is equipped with an EMP shield. As long as it's plugged in, it's part of that electrical system. Theoretically, it should be safe. I believe it now after we've seen the footage of your test, Steve. Does anybody want to add anything else in here before we wrap up this episode?
I'll tell you what, I'm not going to lie. I was super skeptical on this. Chris, you remember, I've been talking about this since it first came up, and I've been like, nope, snake oil. I'm not playing with it. No. Yeah. All right, Steve, you got me, man.
You got him.
I just want to test it with a higher voltage now.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we're talking about protecting individual homes, which is great because you can be insulated quickly. But from a national standpoint, I think we've talked about this before, Chris, where in the event if the transformers went out, right now, with everything chugging along as it's supposed to get a transformer, a large scale transformer for a substation, I mean, it's like a 3 to 6 month wait to have these things manufactured. So in the event of a large scale CME that took out transformers, we'll just say nationally for keeping it small, I mean, it could be years before we have enough new transformers produced. So it's kind of like open-aired question is being an electrician and knowing how the power grids work is why aren't they outfitting, starting with all these substations, outfitting these with maybe a larger EMP Shield device that protects the individual substations, and you could take it as far as outfitting a transformer, mounting one of these weatherproofed right to the side of a transformer, and you're literally insulating the entire system.
Over the course of the past 30 some odd years, there have been multiple initiatives inside the federal government to harden our grid and to protect it from EMPs and CMEs. And every single administration, regardless of which side of the coin they fall on, I frequently say the Democrats, Republicans, two different sides of the same coin, they've shot it down. And the highest number that I've seen, of course, we always know whatever the government budgets, you should plan on spending 2 or 3 times that, was a mere $5 billion to harden and protect our entire grid. I mean, if you want to talk in large scale stuff, and you can speak to it better than I can as an electrician, but there are only 9 substations in the entire country. If you take them out, 9 key points, I should say, like choke points, you take those 9 substations out, you lose the East grid, the West grid, and the Texas grid. And that leaves everybody without power except for the people in close proximity to the power stations. And then the latest numbers I've seen, Mike, say that our suppliers in Germany and Asian countries are pushing upwards of 30 months now to get new transformers out the door. So in your example, like if we had a CME that affected the entire globe, can you imagine the demand on this stuff? Why would we get first pick? Because we don't build any of this stuff ourselves now.
Especially if somebody had already pulled the plug on us, they'd go, we don't like the Americans anyway.
Right. Might be.
Just brings me to the point where it needs to kind of privatize in a sense. There needs to be some people with money that care enough to put some money into this. I mean, you give me $5 billion, I'll find a way to protect all 9 of those substations. I'll tell you that.
Right. Okay. So let's just, before we wrap this up, let's just pose a question here. So whether it's a regional EMP or whether it's a, let's say, national or global CME that takes out the grid, let's just assume the grid is down. If somebody has a solar PV system, battery backups, and is protecting everything with EMP Shield, is that the best of the best? Is there anything else people can do to protect themselves? Because as of now, this is the only thing I know of besides wrapping everything you have in tin foil and Faraday bags, which means you can't really use your stuff in that case. It seems to me this is the only choice at this point in time.
It's the only solution right now that is readily available that you could have installed in a couple of days and know you're good. You could sleep good at night.
Steve Yost, what's your opinion?
Yeah, I'm still a huge proponent on EMP bags, EMP shields of some type around specific devices on top of this. So this will protect at least your daily use items, but I still like having backups.
I know Mike Sterling's fixing to weigh in that, 3 is 2, one is none, and that you should have backup.
2 is 1 and 1 is none.
That's right.
Absolutely. If you don't have contingencies on your contingencies, what do you have? Yeah, I mean, honestly, other than Faraday containment, either you're using a Faraday bag or you build a Faraday container, or you even build a Faraday containment room, which you can do. If you want to dump that kind of money into it, you can do that, man. Other than that, now, one thing that I would really like to see. So apparently solar panels are very susceptible. The panels themselves are very susceptible, but I don't know if anybody's actually done a test terrestrially on actual solar panels with this sort of thing. And honestly, I think that would be a very big thing this time, just because you wind up with a lot of free gamma radiation floating around in one of these kind of situations. No, and I'm talking the panel itself, the actual PV nodules themselves. And it's not because of the electromagnetic pulse so much as all the gamma floating around.
Okay, so I can't speak to the gamma. What I can speak to is that this is the device that EMP Shield makes. It's co-branded with Energy here to protect your solar panels and your MPPT supercharger. We can't say unequivocally that it works because we haven't tested it, but all of us obviously have a new level of respect for EMP Shield's products. It's probably worth testing at some point in time. Maybe that's something we tee up for a future test where we have some solar panels, a supercharger plugged into an inverter, use one of these and see what happens.
I'll get a great big chunk of cobalt and we'll just throw it up in the air, see what it does.
All right.
I like it.
I'll be here in Florida.
Yeah, I was going to say, can I be on video in Denver? Yeah.
I don't have to worry about my hair falling out.
I will say that while Steve was doing all this, he would text me and say, hey, check in on me in a couple hours to make sure that I still respond in case I need you to call somebody to rescue me because I got electrocuted.
Or that there's a black spot in the middle of Florida somewhere that weird, no electricity works there.
I wouldn't be messing with this stuff. So Steve being in, Idaho, he's got the bases covered for us. All right, guys, appreciate everybody's time and efforts. For everybody watching, there's going to be a ton of links down below If you want to get this stuff installed, reach out to Mike Bellamere's company, Switch It Up Inc. If you are a DIY guy, you want to do it yourself, we'll have links to EMP Shield below. If you're looking for battery backups, our first choice always is Energy. Link to them will be down below as well. And if you need somebody to hook up your Energy power stations to a sub panel, Mike at Switch It Up can look after that as well. Stay frosty. Keep an eye open for rogue acorns. Be safe.